So the reason I'm doing this, the reason I am running for Parliament, I keep saying sort of starts and ends really with my daughter and the realization, I think, during the pandemic that people don't, there was no one that was speaking up for families like mine. The government certainly didn't seem to care about families like mine, and that we were completely alone. And for me, my question was very much, what can I do about this? First, in sort of desperate, what can I do about this? What can be done? And then an actual question I asked myself, what can I do about this?
Hello and welcome to the We Are Labour podcast. I am Dan Greef, your host, and this is the show that highlights our amazing Labour candidates and the constituencies we need to win to form the next Labour government. As you hear the stories and experiences from our candidates, I want you to think, how can you help? What can you do to make the difference? Can you go and leaflet, knock on doors, donate money, or phone canvass voters? By giving a little of your time and or money, it will make a massive difference. This election will be won by Labour members doing our bit to help get the Labour message of hope out to our communities. Let's crack on with the show. Hello, welcome to another episode of We Are Labour. The local elections now are behind us, and so I'm back now to talking to PPCs, getting ready for the next general election. Before I go into today's episode with Jen Craft, I just want to reflect on those local elections. It was interesting, wasn't it? The whole basis of this podcast was to really focus in members and supporters of the Labour Party to think about, could we win? Can we win the next general election? And I felt that a few months ago, there was a bit of a blasé attitude by some people who support the Labour Party into thinking that, well, the polls are so good at the moment, so that means that Labour's going to win. Labour will form the next government. And my message is, don't take that for granted. You know, we take the right wing for granted at our peril. Now, we could be in a situation where we win a majority government, but that's going to be incredibly difficult. And I think now is the time where, if you want to make a difference, you can, by going to the battleground seats and helping our candidates like Jen Craft. Because at that local election, I don't think that showed that Labour's going to romp home to a massive majority. Not at the moment anyway. It can be done, and it's in your hands. You've got the agency to make the difference. But the second thing I'd say as well is that we might be the largest party, but we don't want to form a coalition. We don't want to have some kind of agreement with another party. We don't want to have a confidence and supply arrangement with the parties or other MPs, because that then means that they're much more in the driving seat than they should be. We need to have a strong Prime Minister who is Keir Starmer leading this party to make the reforms and changes that we know we need for this country. So it's an interesting election for that reason. I feel like there are lessons to be learned. I think it's a good set of results, but it could be better. And so for that reason, it's important that all members are out there working hard for this. Don't wake up on that Friday morning after the general election saying, I can't believe that this result has happened. The Tories have managed to make it, or we don't have a majority government. You've got to fight for it now. Get the battlegrounds won. That is so important. And the reason you could do that, or the way you could do that, is by going there and canvassing, by leafleting, by turning up and bringing whatever skills you have. Okay. So the strength of the Labour Party is based on its members. And if you're not a member as yet and you're a supporter, please join up and get involved, because it is so important. We can win this by us members pulling together. Right, so that's the first thing about the local elections. The next thing I was going to talk about, of course, is Natalie Elphicke. I did not see that coming. Very interesting. We've had two defections within a few days of each other. I just sort of worry that maybe at this rate we're going to have so many defections that even Jacob Rees-Mogg will be sat on our side, lounging on our side of the chamber. But no, I'd like to know what you honestly think about it. Do you think this is the right move for our party? I'd love to hear from you. So either get in touch on Twitter at Labour Podcast, where I'll start a thread and you can join in the conversation, or underneath the YouTube version of this podcast, please leave a comment. I'd just like to hear from you. Right. So today's show with Jen Craft. She is a local to Thurrock, the constituency where she is standing. Of course, we won control of that council last week, so that's really good news. And I don't know if you know that Thurrock actually went through a massive financial difficulty, let's just say, meaning that the Tory council has cut services, increased taxes, and at the same time, I think one of the services, in particular, a ferry, is, I worked out, older than Church of England. That's now gone. So the Labour administration's got a heck of a job there to make things better for the residents, but at least it's a people-focused council now, which is fantastic. Now, she shares on this podcast a bit about the story she hears in Thurrock and about the real-life experiences people are going through at the moment, but also, and this is the really special part, I think, of this podcast, she shares about her daughter, her little girl who's disabled, and how she is her daughter's carer. And that's really special. I just love that part of this episode in particular. And I just think that we need Jen in Parliament. We need her to sit on the green benches because not only is she incredibly talented and skillful and a great communicator, a very warm person, very likable person, but that she brings with her personal experiences. And I think that's really important. Not only her own personal experiences as a carer, but also she'll bring with her the people of Thurrock into the chamber so that their voices are heard. And I really got that impression. So if you're in the nearby area, if you're South Essex on the estuary and you want to go and help somebody, Thurrock is definitely a seat I recommend. Let's get Jen into Parliament. Thurrock's one of those seats we have to win. So if you're thinking, where can I help? We have to get Jen into Parliament to be able to form that Labour government. Right, I think the lesson there is over. I will now hand over to Jen Craft. I am now really pleased to be joined by Jen Craft. She is our PPC in Thurrock. If you don't know where Thurrock is, it's kind of south of Essex along the Thames estuary. Welcome to We Are Labour, Jen.
Hello, hi Dan, good to be here.
Brilliant to have you on. Now, I actually went to Thurrock a few years ago. I remember there was selections going on, I think, for the 2017 or 2019 elections at the time. Thurrock itself, you're a local to the area, right? Can you just describe your constituency to us a little bit?
Yeah, so I am kind of Thurrock through and through, if you like. Was actually born here in a maternity unit that has since closed down. Grew up here.
No reflection on
Actually
you, just want to say. That's nothing
yeah,
to do
no,
with
no.
anything you did
I do
when you were
sometimes
born.
joke. Yeah, I do sometimes joke. I was born and then they closed the maternity unit. Like, they will never best this child that's just been birthed, so best to give up the ghost. But they but I knock on the doors of people I went to school with sometimes. That's quite fun. And got a huge family, so big connections in the area. And it's an interesting constituency. We call it, in terms of politics, it's sort of a very red wall seat in the south of England. And we're only 35 minutes out of London on the train, and we have a sizable amount of people that either work in London or have moved out of East London to live here. It's a very rural place if you looked at it from the air. But if you come and visit us, you'd have no idea because we're a series of quite large urban sort of centres. It's a sort of very it's a very kind of aspirational community. There are some really lovely people here. That kind of, there are different towns and different centres that have all got their own little feel about them. So it's quite hard to sum up in one go. But yeah.
Wonderful place, and it sort of like stretches along the estuary, doesn't it? I remember all these towns as you're going along, and it's a nice part of the world. It really is. But this is a sort of seat we have to win, don't we, to form the next government? Yeah. So if you want to watch a seat on election night, to the listeners, you have to go and watch Jen in Thurrock because we have to make sure she's an MP to get ourselves into office. So what? Oh, sorry.
We are currently the majority in some polls, so we are to have a majority of one. It tips over in Thurrock. So I think there was one poll that said it. We're playing that quite big. Come to Thurrock. This is where the majority is.
So there you go. The majority one starts here, guys. We've got to build on that for sure. So why are you standing then, Jen? What was it that brought you into politics in the first place?
So, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, I've always been into politics. I think most people who are either involved in the Labour Party in some way or running for office have been. And my mum was a shop steward. My dad was in the Labour Party. That kind of, that upbringing where you're following your dad around delivering leaflets on a Saturday. But it was kind of, that sort of sense of social justice that they sort of instill into you. That whole kind of, if something's not right, then you should try and fix it. And I worked for the Labour Party when I left university. I worked for Margaret Hodge in Barking.
Fantastic. So in that case, Jen, what is probably, the most or the few handful of issues that are most affecting Thurrock this time round?
So I mean, you go out here, and the one thing that comes out over and over and over again is cost of living. It's just the cost of living crisis. And think I said before, it's quite a sort of aspirational area. And you go and talk to a lot of people, they're in a position where they kind of own their homes. They've got a fairly decent job, usually a two-earner household. They're doing all of the right things, but they've found themselves in a place where they're having to go in their savings every single month. And
Yeah.
it's a real shocker. And it's when you have these conversations with people, and again, it's those a lot of people that you chat to have previously voted Conservative because they believe that they were the party that best represented their interests. And there's a real, it's almost like a shock to the system because it's like they've kind of done a 180. And I think the thing that we see hitting people over and over again, I think the one thing that finally is the straw that broke the camel's back was the Liz Truss
Mm.
mini budget, where people's mortgages have absolutely skyrocketed. And it's the lack of understanding from central government that actually, if you are paying another £700 extra a month, that is the difference between keeping your house and losing your house. That is the difference between having to take to work 6 days at work, or actually being able to see your family and like every now and then. It's not the case that we're talking to people and they're saying I can't go on holiday this year. It's that they are just saying, it would be nice to have a little bit of money at the end of the month.
Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
nice not to have those worries. And it's a real it's a real kind of it's a real shaking of the foundations of the kind of the glue that sort of holds people's sort of societal expectations together here. And it's really interesting when you have those chats. And I think me and my husband feel it the same. We're a household where our mortgage has gone up by an unconscionable amount this
Yeah.
year, and it's the same thing that hits us from every angle. And it feels like it is just having those conversations with people that are in the same boat as you. And that's the one thing that is really pushing people to the extreme. And it's not. I think that's sort of the opening to a conversation, and then we got onto talking about how just nothing works. Like
Yeah, we all
nothing
feel that right
works
now,
like
don't
it's
we?
supposed to.
Broken Britain is well and truly here right now, isn't it?
It is.
It's
It,
awful, and I think you know what that there's the kind of Thatcher like promise from the 80s was about you could have your own home, you would have a society which would be working because well, in fact she said no such thing as society, didn't she? But you would be
mm,
able to have your own car, your own bit of luxury in life, you'd be getting ahead. That's not there. And then when people are struggling, there is no public transport. The NHS is underfunded on its
yeah,
knees. There's like the double lie. There's no public services and there's no opportunity. That is the legacy of this government.
exactly. I think it's the whole paying more for less feeling. Uh, the real challenge for us, we find, is that it's not. I wouldn't call it apathy because that sounds like you're blaming the voter when it's not. I think they've had their trust so badly abused, if you like, that it's quite hard to convince them to then put that trust in you.
Yeah,
And that there
yeah,
is a real feeling that, yeah, I mean, I would say it's the Tories' greatest trick, convincing people that it has to be this bad, and that
yeah.
what we've got at the moment is as good as it's going to get, and the small concessions they'll offer us is just about as good as things will happen, when that's just not true. And it's almost like, you don't want to use sort of that kind of Gen Z Reddit language, but that
Well, we're
gaslighting
we're
type
we're Gen
thing.
Z, aren't we? Of course. So
Are we Gen
you
Z? Oh yeah, I'm
we
gonna say yeah, I'm
we get
definitely a Gen
this.
Zer. That's it. But that kind of it's almost like they've gaslighted the country, that kind of
Yeah,
thing. You
yeah,
talk to people and you'll knock on the door and you'll say, have you got any issues? I've not really got anything at the moment. And then you'll say, well, a few of your neighbours have told me about their mortgages going up. Oh well, there is that. And then you get into chatting, and then it's really interesting because you see that they're just almost accepting of how bad things are.
yeah,
And it's that I think is the point where I kind of find myself having a lot of empathy with people because I spent quite a lot of time talking about Barking. I didn't tell you why I'm specifically doing this, but I was in a very similar place about 4 or so years ago, and feeling that it was, the country was governed by people who did not care about families like mine. And we had to shield during the pandemic because my oldest child has additional needs, and we didn't know what that looked like for her at the time. And very much a feeling that no one cares about families like mine, that this kind of, we don't enter into the conversation. And it was a real shock. And like most people who parent a disabled child, I'm on a lot of Facebook groups and seeing some of the experiences that people were going through at what was a really difficult time, while being told that actually, your child can be sacrificed for the greater good, essentially, was a real kick in the teeth. And I think it was a bit of a wake up call because, I'd hit a level of disaffection with politics, I'd say, that whole, it felt like things weren't changing. We're hitting against a brick wall, and we'd spent a good full up to that point a good decades in the doldrums, if you like, not really making loads of headway. And it felt really like, I'd been in the trenches with, I think, a lot of Labour activists for a decade in opposition. It's really hard to keep going. And I think that was a real wake up call that actually, no, it does need to change. But then when people were saying, talking to people and they're like, oh, nothing changes, you're all the same, and all those kind of things, and I'm not going to bother voting. I do get that because I landed in a really similar place. And it's just, for me, it was, well, got to be the change at some point. And that's the way I do things. If something needs doing, and I think I can do it, I'll give it a go.
Wow, that is a really inspirational story. Yeah, that's tough. That time of the pandemic. I
Mm,
mean, I know it's so recent in our history, and yet in some ways in our memories we've moved on a lot because
I
life went
know.
back to normal, and you tried to move on from it. But actually, we've been through some really dark times, and
Yeah,
I think the problem is when you get someone like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss who have been running the country through those times and made such an utter mess. Unfortunately, everyone thinks all politicians are like that. How
that's
many
the
times
one.
do we get
Yeah,
told all politicians are like this? They're all having parties. They're all,
yeah,
spaffing the economy up the wall or whatever. And you
yeah.
go, no, hang on a minute, that's the Tories. Why?
It's
Why
not
is it
true.
Labour gets the blame for the great financial crash of 2008 in America, and yet they don't get blamed for actually what they've done? But I do think
Exactly.
this, this kind of apathy and this lethargy, isn't it, that's in the electorate right now,
Mm,
is quite sad, really, because I think people are battered and bruised by the whole thing and think,
yeah,
who can I trust when actually I've been so let down for 14
exactly.
years?
And I think if you look at Boris Johnson, I think the damage he did to our political culture is untold. I mean, the man's an
Yeah,
outright liar. He lied and lied and lied. And I think it's frustrating. I used to live in Tower Hamlets briefly, and he was the mayor when we were there. And we'd watch like Mayor's Question Time, the absolute contempt he had for any kind of scrutiny or accountability. And
yeah,
so a whole load of things that just kind of put the city right back. And then you see him coming up to be prime minister, and you're like, no, come on, we know what he's like, we know he's a liar. But it was just, he did it so convincingly that people bought into it. And I think that's really hard. Like, imagine if you can put yourself in someone's shoes. You've trusted this person that's basically promised you everything, and they've turned out to be an absolute charlatan. It's
yeah,
quite hard to sort of take a step back from that and put trust in someone else. And that's sort of what we're up against, really, is
yeah.
in that context of being able to say to people, no, actually, we're not, you know, we're not going to lie to you. One of the things I think is really effective, because I think it's being a local candidate gets your foot in the door. Like, I don't think it's the be all and end all, but I think it gets your foot in the door. So I think that's why I always lead with, I was born here and raising my kids here, and this is
And the
my
reason they shut
community.
down the maternity hospital, I know, yeah.
Yes, yeah. They'll never achieve greatness like me
Well, it's your
again.
fault.
But it's, yes, all me. But actually, my first ever political action, if you like, was writing a letter to the then Secretary of State when I was 7 about please don't close our local A&E. They
Really? There
still
you
close. Yeah,
go.
they still close the A&E. So,
Oh, at least you
but
tried. At least you
it
tried.
was very, I was a very precocious child, but she did write back, which was very sweet, and still have that somewhere. But yeah, it does. It gets your foot in the door if you are a local person. I think it's really helpful, especially when you're dealing with that apathy. And I think you use what you have, and then I kind of have those conversations where I just say, I get it, I get where you're coming from, and I think I'm in a very similar boat to you. And one of the things I find really reassuring is I've become a lot more confident saying, no, this is what the Labour team have to offer the front bench. This is what they've got going on. If we put something through your door and we say we're going to do it, we're going to do it because
Yeah.
it's being funded and it's being costed. That's why you're not seeing big, extremely, dazzly statements every week, because it wouldn't be true. And, that gets people listening. And I think that's it's really helpful. And the things when people say, "Oh, you not got any policies," and you start to say, "Well, we have." GP and dentists when you want to see 13,000 new police officers, Great British Energy, all those kind of things that you're like, but we're not putting it on the side of a bus
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because that's been done, and that's where you get that's what kind of the moves of charlatans. We're not going to do that. If we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it.
And also, I think this current government, and Sunak has been just as bad as his predecessors on this.
Yeah.
They're just fighting these ridiculous campaigns based on a weird culture war quite often. Like the sick
Yeah.
note thing was really just a way to try and throw
No.
red meat to Tory supporters to say, yeah, everyone's not working hard or whatever. The Rwanda policy, the whole thing, was it 1.8 million per person who might be deported?
Two million, I
they're just
think.
little, oh, is it 2 million? So they're just little gimmicks that
Yeah,
they're just throwing out there.
it
They're not
is.
actually a vision. And I'm going to come on to the missions actually, because I really
Mm.
want to know, like, how do you think the missions can make a big difference in Thurrock?
Talked about the cost of living crisis, economic stability. I think, having the idea that once again you can start to plan for the future and you're not just keeping the wolf at the door is absolutely huge. And the other one that when we look at some of the more specific stuff, I love our green pledge. I love Great British Energy. The reason my family actually are in Thurrock is because my granddad moved his family down in the 50s to work in the power station at Tilbury, and
Oh,
that got demolished recently. It's coal based one, so obviously. But looking at the port we visited last week with Ed Miliband, they're looking to move to renewables and having a real industry in making wind turbines and assembling them there. And that's the kind of thing that I think would make such an absolute difference to people here. It's those sort of career, those unionized, those lifelong jobs, that kind of certainty that you start this job from school. You start it, you come out of university, you come out of school, you start this job, and then you can see yourself working there for the next couple of decades and working your way up, and actually being able to put the kind of foundation in. And at the same time, you stay here, you stay in Thurrock, you put those community roots down, and you bring up your family. And that's something that I can see making a huge difference. And again, with our green pledges, looking at that side of it, if we lead the race on renewables, we know that will bring down the cost of energy for people. We know that will happen. And that's the kind of thing that will make a massive difference. One of the real shockers, this was so I've been selected for over a year now. As you can tell, I've got some greys coming in, but I didn't have those before. I looked a lot younger a year and a half ago. But one of the first things that hit me, do you remember last 2022 Christmas? It was freezing, snow everywhere, and we'd been knocking on doors, and it took a few. Like, I kept thinking, oh, we're catching people as they're heading out, but no, they were just sat there in their coats because they didn't want to put the
yes.
heating
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
in the snow. And
I,
it
I
wasn't just
remember that time, and I also remember like
yeah,
being very aware on the doorstep of keeping the conversations short because obviously
yeah.
people are
You
having
want
their
them to
doors
close.
open,
Yeah,
and you're
you don't
like,
want them
this
to
is
let the heat out.
yeah, this is horrific. I
It's
can't
mad.
let somebody cool their house down because they're talking to me. So I was like really fast, and I just want to let you get back to your warmth. That is
I
a
know.
sad reflection on our society that in the 21st
It
century. Do
absolutely is.
you remember the year 2000? We were like talking about a new millennium and how exciting it
Yeah,
was going to be, and I
yeah.
think with like the Labour government at the time, it did feel that way. And
Mm,
yet, a couple of decades later, and here we are where people can't even heat their homes.
yeah. And it's a shocker. It is the heat or eat. But it's the people you see in their coats as well. Again, it's not breadline stuff. It's not the kind of usual suspects where you'd expect to be knocking up in a tower block and would be shocked enough at that, because it's this kind of degradation of our society. But it's people who are in fairly decent looking houses, or older people that, probably got money. You'd hope they'd have money put aside to kind of look after them in their old age, those kind of things, where you just sort of find it real. It's a real kind of building of why is everyone having to make these kind of decisions.
Yeah.
It's completely beyond. And the other one of the missions that I think is absolutely would have such an impact here, on the NHS, rebuilding our NHS, making it fit for the future. I mean, one of the real, everyone has a story to tell, don't know, about why the NHS doesn't work where they are, but our hospital trust recently received an inadequate rating. And we've just found out that they are going to be cutting 600 jobs in
Wow.
not in the light of that, but it comes on the back of that. Our maternity unit ran out of gas and air for the best part of 6 months. Well, it didn't run out, they had to turn it off because it was leaking. That was
Wow.
also rated unsafe by the CQC. It's like a whole litany of things. We have the second worst levels of GP waiting lists in the country. And so it all sounds very high level, and these are all figures and all kind of big things. But when I talk the NHS to people, and this is another thing that you have to sort of prod when people want to talk about it, you hear these stories that if it was a Labour government, it would be the front page news.
Yeah.
So this woman I spoke to, her dad had a heart attack, and he went into hospital. He was saved. He was, given a stent or similar. About a month later, he starts having these palpitations and feeling a bit dizzy and a bit weird. He phones the hospital. They say, we can see you in a few months. He tries phoning the GP. No, you're under the care of this. We can't see you. He rings round and round. Eventually, the GP says, right, we can see you next Thursday if you come in at 12. He was dead before then.
Oh, wow. Poor
And
man.
I mean, this woman, I spoke to her, and it was just, she was so matter of fact about it. And I was like, there wasn't even like a level of anger. It was this resignation that
Mm.
that's just how things are. And I thought, could you imagine that under a Labour government? Like, a granddad,
Yeah.
a dad, like a decent old bloke died because he just couldn't see someone.
Yeah.
Those,
Well,
those kind of horrors.
I
And
think we
it's
have
like,
to be alert of that. And also, when we have a Labour government next time, we have to, I think, make the argument as to what we've inherited and keep
yeah,
reminding people of that. Because I feel like sometimes as the Labour Party, we form a government and we do all this great stuff. And we're probably
mm,
the worst at telling everyone what we've done and how it changes their lives directly. People then
yeah,
take it for granted. And then when we're not in power anymore, your Short Start Centre gets shut down, your hospital's failing, and
mm,
it turns out you can't get gas and air to women who are in labour. People are dying of not having treatment or being seen in
mm.
time. And we have to make it really explicitly clear these are
These
political
are, yeah.
choices that governments make, and you have to know the difference between what we're going to do and what Conservatives already have done.
Mm. I think that's the thing. I think we forget that we are a conservative small C country. People, it's hard to get people to vote for change, even when things are as bad as they are now, because people need that stability in their life before they can feel confident to look for a change. And I think the Conservatives are very good at using very passive language.
Right.
So, they'll say, oh, the NHS is failing, not we failed the NHS, like the economy, there is a cost of living crisis. Like it just happened, the
Yeah.
economy
Yeah.
just crashed.
Yeah.
The NHS just isn't working. There is a police shortage. They just all went somewhere. We don't know where they went. And it had absolutely nothing to do with us. They use this real passive language when they talk. And I think it's really interesting. Some of the attack stuff we've done now is actually really saying, no, it's a conservative cost of living crisis. They caused it. And they did this. It's political choices that have led us to where we are now.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think there's a bit where I think it's political neglect as well. So it's not necessarily a choice to do X, Y, and Z. There's just not being aware of how important that is to people's lives. And actually looking in those directions. And you think it is a choice. The work where we are, it was a choice to underfund the NHS, and if you look at things like defence, it was a choice to underfund the armed forces. It was all of these things are political decisions. And it's when they come home and they hit people and they impact, I think it is important for us to make it clear that they made that choice, and this is why we are being impacted with it. Conservatives have decided their priorities are not those which meet the needs of most people in this country. But
Yeah.
it's an important argument to make. But again, you have to be careful how you're making it, because you don't want to be blaming that voter for it.
Well, I
Because
feel like that with Brexit as well. Like we,
yeah,
we we have to be so careful to say and I do genuinely believe this as well, that people have been lied to by
Yeah.
Boris Johnson and Rees-Mogg, and these people who are based on the Brexit side of the argument, who promised 350 million a week for the NHS and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and people aren't seeing that in their NHS. They're not seeing it in the
Yeah.
hospitals, their GP clinics, and to say, well, in that case, of course, it's not your fault. How were you to know the impact of Brexit? You weren't to know. Nobody expected you to.
Yeah.
However, somebody came along in the form of Boris Johnson and told you things which just were fundamentally not true,
We're not
and you're
true.
being deceived.
Yeah. And I think I've had one person say to me, I believe these lies, and that's on me, which was really interesting. Um, but I thought that that's quite a big admission to make, like a huge admission to make. Imagine,
Yeah.
looking around and saying, "Oh gosh," you know.
I don't
And I
think it
think
is on
that
them. I mean,
no,
I used to be a politics teacher, and I went to Strasbourg and places. And I remember in 2016 saying to myself, after meeting MEPs, teaching the syllabus at A level, and I remember thinking, I'm way too underqualified to make this decision.
yeah,
Completely underqualified to make this decision. I'm a teacher who understands it to a certain level, and that's it. And I would say that's probably a bit more above most people's understanding of the EU, just because that
mm,
is my job. So, how can most of us know in such a huge
yeah,
debate which way to go? But we're not all economists. We're not all aware of our trading relationships on an international standing. That's
mm,
where responsible government comes in, to not sort out its internal party problems by throwing it to the country and gambling effectively. And I think,
yeah, exactly,
I think it is the fault of that government. We have to well
yeah,
and truly squarely pin that on them.
yeah. I mean, and also it's that thing, isn't it? Making sure that we don't let them off. It's not just 4 years; it's 14 years. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
14 years. David Cameron pursued austerity. He had the austerity agenda in 2010, and we've got this in Thurrock, where last year our council went bankrupt, and we had at the time it was the highest bankruptcy in English local government history. It was the so we go big, but it
Yeah.
was, I mean, absolutely huge, and it was there was a Conservative administration at the time, and they had basically followed a really unreliable investment strategy that people were flagging up. Labour councillors raised it and said, "Look, hang on, this doesn't look right." They sort of laughed them out the room. Oh, what do you know? Those kind of things. But I said the impact of David Cameron's austerity, cutting massive cuts to local authorities, absolutely swinging cuts, and then at the same time, removing any kind of scrutiny in the name of getting rid of red tape, halving bureaucracy, getting rid of the audit commission, and relaxing investment rules for local authorities. It's a perfect storm, and it came to roost here in Thurrock. And it's like us that are paying the price. And I think that's it. It's not, you can look at it in isolation and say the Conservatives here were acting in an unusual fashion. They were acting outside what their party does. But no, it's absolutely a Conservative problem. It was
Yeah.
one put in motion by their national government, and it was one that they then decided to pick up and run with. And their attitude towards scrutiny, when I've sort of seen some of the attempts by the Labour group to raise this issue and say, I think this investment strategy is flawed, I think we need to look at it again. They're the contempt with which they held those questions was very reminiscent of how Boris Johnson used to ward off any attempts to ask him what he was doing. And I think it was really clear that, that rotten apple not falling far from the rotten tree.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
they were basically following a kind of political culture that was set by their leadership at the top of their party. And so here we are faced with that. We're not only faced with all of those national problems that the Conservatives have landed us with. We're not only faced with that, we are faced with, paying 18% more council tax over 2 years. Like that's what's happened over last year and this
Wow.
year. That's how much more we are paying. And it's probably gonna, they're looking at still it's to pay off this debt, it's gonna take decades, the debt that they've landed us with. And all of our services are being cut to the absolute bone. So for most people, when you go out door knocking, you've got local elections in, or just look, I'm looking at the date, just under 2 weeks. I think, yeah, it's next week, it's next Thursday.
Yeah. It's next
So,
Thursday. Yeah. Yeah. Week on Thursday. Yeah.
just over a week away, we've got local elections. You go out and you talk to people about it, and they want to talk to you about bins. Our bin service has just gone to fortnightly, and we're having to pay for our garden waste. And it's, all politics is local. But that's the surface level that people see, and they're really angry about it, like really, really
Yeah.
angry, because they are paying more and getting less. But then you scratch that surface, there's things like cut to transport for SEND children, kind of youth clubs, anything that they don't have a statutory provision to provide, they will not do it. because they can't. Or we have a ferry service, and it's I come up with all these mad facts, but it's the oldest continuous river crossing in Europe. It was set in place in a charter by Henry VIII, but it
Wow,
is
that's quite old.
yeah, it's now not running. It's now no longer
Oh,
running.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because they cut the funding for it because they were under no well, they're not under statutory obligation to provide it. So it's as of the beginning of this month, it hasn't been running a service, which is absolutely shocking for something that's been going for the best part of 400 years.
That's older than the Church of
And they,
England. I mean, come
yeah,
on, that's pretty
that's
well established, isn't it? Bloomin' heck.
that's the one. But it's like all those things that people don't see that a local authority does, and they don't see that government does, and until it really hits. And it's a real anger thing, I think, for people. And it's I think it was a national policy that drove those kind of their cavalier attitude, but also it was the kind of attitude and contempt for the electorate and for scrutiny and accountability that the national government showed at that time that filtered down into how they were acting here. And there's a real parallel in it. And you can see it and you think, yeah, it's almost like they want to be Boris Johnson light. It
Yeah.
looks like, but and you kind of sort of laughing a bit, but it's not funny. It's like it's really not funny, and it's those conversations when you're having with people, and it's almost a disbelief that we can't believe we are where we are.
Right, so we're back now. We've just had a few technical things with the recording. So if you're listening to this, I put a little whoosh there just to kind of tie these two recordings together. Now, Jen and I have been talking so far about, how life will be transformed with a Labour government. But I just want to think ahead now, Jen, if I may, to imagine we do have that Labour government and you are an MP. And, you're very luckily asked by Keir Starmer to have a job as a minister. Which department, which brief are you interested in and why?
So I was thinking, I've got two answers. I've got a serious one and then a not at all serious one. Um, so serious one. So obviously I'm a parent of a disabled child, and I've got a hell of a lot to say on the SEND landscape. So I would love to do some work around SEND reform in the Department of Education. My whole kind of driving thing really is my daughter, and the need to make the world look different than it does for her, and that's kind of what pushes me, and for children like her, and actually make life a lot easier for SEND parents. And I think I've got a real strong belief that if you design an education system that works for SEND children, you design an education system that works for all children, because you have something that is designed to meet the individual needs and abilities of a child, rather than hammering them over the head with this is what you must learn, which is what currently happens. And it would be lovely to see it would be like kind of lovely to see STEM parents get a bit of a break, and actually have the needs of our children kind of met a lot more easily, rather than it having to be kind of a constant uphill fight.
Yeah,
And anything that I could do to make that a reality would be really good. So there you go. That's the sensible
that's a
answer. And
serious one.
the
Yep,
one that's not at all sensible, and I'm going
yep.
to say it because she spoke at a fundraiser of mine and absolutely roasted me. This is Margaret Hodge. Um, she was the Minister for Culture and Culture, Media and Sport and the last Labour government, and it looked like an absolutely brilliant job, because she spent quite a significant amount of time attending things like the opera and shows and plays. And of course, it was an absolutely difficult uphill graph for her to have to go to all of these things. And oh, wait a minute, I'm going to have to leave early on Friday surgery again to make sure that I make the opera on time, because the Queen's going to be there and you can't be late for the
Wow.
Queen.
One has to
So,
dress for my meeting this afternoon with the
yeah,
Queen. Yeah.
I think that's probably that looks like the absolute job to luck yourself into, doesn't it? So there we go.
There you go. Amazing.
And
About
that just feels like a little bit of revenge for her delightful roast speech at my fundraiser. So there we go.
so your revenge is a promotion. I like that. That's very nice. That works out well. I used to actually be in it, like briefly. I was doing an SEN teaching job because I was a teacher, and I was at SEND, and I was working in a special needs school in Cambridge, and I think I learned more in that job than any other teaching job I've ever done. Something about teaching children to communicate with other people, because some of these children I was working with were quite locked in. and to try and teach them to reach out and communicate with others. And those where when you see that happening, you go, oh my word, like these kids could do maths absolutely fine, and they could, they could do a lot of their subject stuff absolutely fine as well. They're primary school age, but in terms of communication and that stuff, it was just amazing. I learned so much about that, and it did make me think exactly what you're saying there about good education is about really making sure that everyone's included. And
Yeah.
if you've got a system that does work for 7 children, it is better for everyone. I'm absolutely convinced of that because it
Well,
is the
it's to make
essential
sure that,
skills.
yeah. Well, it's if you've got a society, this is what we're about in the Labour Party. If you have a society that means that everyone can be the best version of themselves that they can be, you have the best society. And that's basically at the heart of it. And I think too often disabled children and disabled people get overlooked in that equation. And it's a real push thing. And there is, I'm, before I had my daughter, I was a big, almost bullish believer in mainstream education for disabled children. And the at the current landscape, the reality is that is not somewhere that can meet the needs of lots and lots of children, which is a real shame because there's a hell of a lot to be said for normalizing disability, for growing up with it, for understanding that some people think differently to you, their brains work differently, some people
Yeah,
have physical differences, and actually knowing that makes all of us better people. And it's a real push, and having, I think, making sure that all children find themselves in a place that is the best place for them and the best education that they can get. It's a real tough thing. And I think there's, since having my daughter, that, like I said, the reality is we're very lucky in that she is at a school that is able to meet her needs. But a lot of parents do not find that, and it's a
yeah,
real challenge. And the kind of the pushback at the moment is so nasty. It was a real thing. It struck me quite hard where the person that was in charge of leading the review for the government on the SEND system referred to the SEND, by the way, special educational needs and disability, for people that don't know. I always try to be less acronymy, but the person that was leading the review into the educational healthcare plans, which are basically how you a document that outlines what your child's needs are when in whatever educational setting they are in. Um, he referred to them as a golden ticket, which really feeds into the whole narrative of basically you're on the make if you're after this for your kids, and it's
wow.
a real,
On the
it's a
make,
real
looking after
low blow, and
your
yeah,
children's potential being unlocked and their ability to thrive and be themselves and get support to
exactly.
be themselves. That's terrible thing to say, isn't
And
it?
there's a yeah, and there's a real, I mean, the current government's way of dealing with the SEN system is to try and lower the amount of people that need an EHCP rather than understanding the need. So
Yeah,
understanding what need that exists, and how do they meet that. Their aim is to reduce the amount of people that need it. The amount of these EHCPs that are given out. That's the feeling that comes across. And I think it's the same that you see in their narrative towards disabled people in general is the cuts last week to the like you already spoke about, that kind of attacks on disabled people,
yeah,
and that it's finding scapegoats on some of society's most vulnerable is pretty despicable.
it
And
is.
I mean,
Yeah,
we didn't have a minister for disabled people for a long time. They completely like thought the position was not necessary, and it's a real, yeah, so it's a real bugbear of mine. It's one of the things I can like consistently bang the drum about, is that need. It's a need for inclusion, and but it's also a need. I think it's a need to kind of recognize that disabled lives are valid, and the experiences of disabled children are valid and equal, and they have as much right as any other child to an education, and they have as much right to achieve their full potential as any other child does. And that's the thing that's a real passion of mine.
wow. Can I just explore that? I know it's a question about like government posts, but I think it does raise a lot of really important
Mm.
questions. And one of the ones that I think you touched on that I've seen in several different parts of my life is that we have a voluntary caring army of people in this country who
Mm.
are looking after, people with disabilities and their families, people who are frail, unwell, the elderly. There's a lot of people who are doing that, and it's all done for free out of love for their loved one, with very little support often, right? And I think we are kind of, we need to appreciate in this country is like, and the reason I know this is from being a teacher in that school. A lot of what we're doing is also giving respite to the parents who had that really intense, experience day in day out with their child, depending what the disability was. It's about looking after those people as well, isn't it? And realizing that those
Yeah.
people need our support right now.
And there is a real one of the things I'm quite excited about is the launch of a national caring service, a national carer service, to kind of give that parity of esteem, and actually make that something that is valued. I'm an unpaid carer, and the kind of things that people are talking about, it is quite shocking. We get a small amount of carers allowance, and that that is nowhere near covers the amount of care work that you do. And of course I do it because it's out of love, and a lot of people do it from that basis. But I think the kind of work that Carers UK, for example, have been doing, looking at the savings, I mean, if the savings to the taxpayer from the amount of unpaid care work that gets undertaken, is truly phenomenal. And I think it looks at the job that unpaid carers do could be something that anyone ends up undertaking in their life. And one of the things that I think is to position care and carers as a universal service, the universality of it, because at the moment it's seen as quite niche. It's seen as something that not many people have to access. But I mean, I think there is a wide variety of people that at some point will need caring support in their life, or will become an unpaid carer themselves. And I think putting that as a position and saying this is something that is probably likely to affect quite a lot of people in the country at some point is really important. And you said as well, it's important to recognise what burnout looks like, and it's important to provide actual help that carers ask for, not what people think they need. I have a brother, it's funny, but it's not funny, of someone I know who was offered some mindfulness classes when she said she was suffering, the effects of being 24/7 carer. Perhaps she'd like to try mindfulness. And it's one of those things that,
shocking, isn't
yeah,
it?
that's like, no, actually, a little bit of respite for a few hours or a good night's sleep might be the thing that will sort me out. But it is, I think, and it's seeing value in it as well. And part of the other thing is the people that carers look after, disabled people, it's seeing that role that is absolutely integral to allowing, to enabling that person to be the best version of themselves, to live their best life. And I think that again is so important, and to not lose track of those people in that conversation. And it's not, I think a lot of people see caring and carers as that kind of late life in a home residential home situation, when for a lot of people the reality is something completely different, and it's basically allowing someone to either access society or access employment or access activities, or actually, like I said, just being that best version of themselves that they can be. And it goes to the very heart of our society and who we are as a party.
Wow, I think that was so powerful, and wow, what an insight you have that you could bring to Parliament and bring to government, hopefully one day as well. So that said, then I've got a bit of a fun question to ask all of our candidates, I did actually ask every one of our guests, and then John Curtis wouldn't answer; he just said no to it. So I'm gonna, he's a bit moody, but no, I'm gonna ask you this question. That is, if one day you are taken on to Desert Island Discs, the show from Radio 4. What would be the song choice that you would take with you to the desert island?
It's hard to pick one, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm
I
afraid
think the
just have
thing
to be
is,
one. Sorry.
it's hard to pick one. You said I was toying between a few. I'm gonna say it's either or. So either Elbows One Day Like This. I love that song. It's the one that when we got married, everyone sung it as we left the church. It was really nice. And lovely.
Oh, that's
It's
sweet.
very uplifting, isn't it? It actually came on as I walked into the office this morning and the sun's out. Or the other one is, Here Comes the Sun, the Beatles.
Yeah, but
That
that's two
lovely.
songs, Jen. You're not allowed to do that.
Sorry,
You've
it's an
just managed
either
to
or.
sneak two in there, haven't you? Okay, so
I'll
which
sneak
one?
it in.
Okay, so you
I'll
got
go for
two
One Day Like This.
songs.
There you go.
One day like this. All right, then I'll put that on there then. Or yeah, the other one by the Beatles is pretty famous, so there you go. Okay, and then
though, isn't it?
I do agree. And actually, there's a playlist, so I always forget the name of this thing, so I apologize for my lack of professionalism here. But on Spotify, there's a playlist I put together. I think it's called Doorstep Win 24, and I will add your songs to that.
That's really uplifting. That's good.
Yeah, so there you go.
It's good
so
to pick one from my
and then you can check
when
that
I was
out.
in my teenage years when I was really into Radiohead.
Yeah. Oh, whoa! What do you mean? Why is that in past tense? Why are you still not into? That's my favorite band.
I love Radiohead, but I don't think anyone really needs to be listening to one of their more downbeat numbers when they're trying to psych themselves up.
Paranoid Android or something when they're going around on a leaflet round. Yeah, true. It's a bit deep, isn't it? We'll keep it light. So, right, Jen, people who are listening to this right now, they will be thinking they want to come out and help you get elected. So, I'm going to ask you now. Where do they head to in online? Where do they find you? Are there any campaign days? Where do they find information about your campaigns so they can get involved with either leafleting, canvassing, whatever you need? How can our members help you?
So we've got a WhatsApp group, which is the best thing to join. And I can provide you with all the details. So we've got best way to do it is to text our organizer. And she adds you to the WhatsApp group, and that literally says every session that's going on. At the moment, there are 4 sessions a day because we have locals, but I know this is going out after the locals. So, but there won't be 4 sessions a day, but there will be at least several weekly. We have a big campaign session at the end of each month, and that's a brilliant one to join. We hire a hall, we get quite a lot of people down, you get a lunch thrown in, all training is provided, we make sure everyone goes out fully briefed. And if it's your first time, you never go out, you never knock on doors on your own straight away. You always get to see someone doing it until you feel comfortable and happy. And the other thing I'd say is we've got a hell of a lot of other things that aren't just knocking on doors, because that's not everyone's cup of tea. Got leaflet delivery. Again, the number for the organizer is the best one. Anyone that can give us an hour or so on that is brilliant. Got digital campaigning, which is becoming more and more important. And that is quite easy to do, just from your own armchair if you need to do that. And always a bit of dialogue canvassing, always happy, always really helpful, always good to pick up on that. And the other thing, the last thing that I will say is we do need money. We are always after money. If anyone wants to drop us a bob or two, I'd be really grateful. We've got quite an exciting, unique fundraiser coming up, which I am not going to mention until we've got it sorted, because I don't want anyone nicking the idea.
Wow.
But it will be.
Sounds
it will be
it?
quite. It's a different one. It's a different idea. And you do not need to go to a fundraising dinner, which is the main sell. You do not need to go to sit in a room and hear the same speech you've heard about 5 times already. So yes, there you go. That's
a piece of dry chicken as well in the mix, and you go, oh, the same dry chicken breast they bring out, all these things, marvelous.
Yep, and the same raffle prizes.
Yeah, well, it's the same raffle prizes, literally, because it's been donated by the members who won them last time. Yeah. Okay, lovely. That
the bottle of House of Commons wine.
Yeah, the chocolates, the book by Michael Foot. Yeah, okay, it all goes around. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So check out all of your details. Jen, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I think you've got such an insight and such passion. So I wish you all the best of luck with your campaign. I'm going to come to Thurrock at some point and do my bit. So I'll bring the family down, and we can sort of have a little day out on Thurrock and come out on the doorstep. So we'll be there. Thank you. We've got a very nice bird sanctuary. That's good if you've got kids. Brilliant. So we can do that and do the birds run around it. They've got kingfishers at the moment. So if you're lucky, you get to see a kingfisher. That's pretty cool. I'd love to see that. Pretty exciting. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jen, and good luck with your campaign. Thank you very much. Cheers, Dan. Thank you. Bye. Before I go, may I ask a massive favour? Like this podcast and smash that subscribe button. Leave a review. Share this podcast with other Labour Party members, your CLPA executive, and anyone who, like us, wants to fight for the next Labour government our country so desperately needs. If you're a candidate and wish to come onto the show, then email me at labourpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, bye for now.